Morning, good evening, good afternoon, whenever the this finds you. I want to welcome you to Mornings with the Murph for Wednesday, February 15th, 2023. I'm your host, John Murphy. I hope you and all your loved ones had a safe and fantastic Valentine's Day. I know that I spent a lot of time with my cat. But with that, let's talk sports and what's going on in the world of sports. First, we're going to talk about the NBA. Obviously, everything that's going on in the league. I'm going to talk about my thoughts initially on the Kyrie Irving, Luka Doncic pairing, as we've seen 2 games so far of those guys together. We've seen 4 games of Kyrie Irving in a Mavericks uniform, but now we've finally been able to see what it is like with him alongside Luka. I want to talk about what that looks like to me and some glaring problems about the Dallas Mavericks that no one wants to admit. Also, I want to talk about the Detroit Pistons, where I think they're at so far. Now that we're heading into the All-Star break, I want to give some mid-season grades for the players, for the front office, and for the coaching staff as well. And I want to go on a little bit of a rant because you know what? There's some real going on in the NBA world. I have some things on my mind. I have some to say. We will get to that at the end of the show. But first, let's get started with Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic. Over the past few days, the Dallas Mavericks have finally been able to put out their star pairing, and as promised, they have looked dangerous on the offensive end. Even though they have not won a game together just yet, the games that they have played in the moments where they are finding out how to play together, it's downright tantalizing. The thing that's kind of crazy is that, like, you know, a lot of times you see with these guys that, like, the problem is that, like, you have guys that are, like, demanding the ball, but in reality, these guys are, like, trying to get the ball to each other as much as humanly possible. So, you know, for Luka and Kyrie to be 2 of the best ball handlers in the game, arguably 2 of the best ball handlers of all time, I mean, offensively, these guys are putting on a masterpiece. I mean, according to The Athletic, Kyrie and Luka have only played 58 minutes so far. And during that stretch, the Mavericks have averaged 131.2 points per 100 possessions, which is insane. If they can keep that rate up, especially come April, May, and maybe June, then they're going to be dangerous. However, as many points as they can score, bloody hell are they going to give up points in return, because despite the fact that this team was able to go out and put together an offensive masterclass in getting Kyrie Irving, you gave up your best defensive player to do it and essentially have exposed this giant gaping hole on your roster that you really don't have any defensive prowess, which is funny because, first of all, Jason Kidd was brought to Dallas for his prowess as a defensive head coach. And, you know, how is that going? Dallas Mavericks are 23rd in the NBA in defensive rating. By the way, that's before they got Kyrie Irving. That's when they had Dorian Finney-Smith. I'm going to tell you right now, that team's going to go down to 29th or 30th in defensive net rating. I think they're going to set some records, and I think we're going to, you know, scratch our heads at some of the defensive performances that they're going to have, because we have seen already that they have allowed quite a few points. So, you know, they allowed 133 points to the Sacramento Kings, and then they allowed 124 points to the Minnesota Timberwolves. So as good as they've been offensively so far, the other teams have been better. And that's the problem. When these two were put together, I think we just glaringly ignored the other side of the basketball. And if you were to look at the standings today and who'd they have to play if the playoffs were to start right now, the Dallas Mavericks would have to face against the Sacramento Kings, which I'm pretty confident they would win that matchup. But then from there, they'd have to face either the Denver Nuggets or Memphis Grizzlies, which I'm telling you right now, if they face either of those teams in the playoffs today, Denver, no chance in hell. Memphis, I'd give Luka a shot, but at the same time, I think it'd end in 6. And the reality of it is, I'm not quite sure if Kyrie Irving is a guy that's going to look at this team long term. He even refused to answer the questions about whether or not he's going to think about Dallas long term. He was like, it's an unnecessary distraction, you know? But the problem with Kyrie is that with him saying that, he's making it an unnecessary distraction. He could just say, I very much enjoyed my time with the Dallas Mavericks so far. I know those conversations will come in the summer, but right now I want to focus on basketball, playing with Luka Doncic. I'm very grateful to be a Dallas Maverick today, and that's my focus. Like, you could say something like that, and no one would blame you because, yeah, you're going to be a free agent in the summer. You didn't ask to be a Dallas Maverick. I mean, you did ask to be traded, and therefore, you reap what you sow there, bud. But at the same time, you didn't necessarily ask to go there. However, I mean, if I'm Kyrie, yes, you could go and be a Los Angeles Laker. Yes, you could go sign a long-term contract over there. But if I'm Kyrie, you got to think the long game here, man. I mean, if Dallas is willing to give you 3 years and match Luka Doncic's contract and give you max money, like that might not be the years that you want. Like the Lakers might give you a 4-year deal in the summer. But at the same time, if you can play alongside Luka Doncic, that is the best chance that Kyrie Irving's going to have at winning a championship for the rest of his career, because Luka Doncic is going to be the best player in the world in the next 3 years. Giannis Antetokounmpo is incredible. Luka's a different level. And if he starts figuring out how to take care of his body, if he starts figuring out some of the other mental aspects of the game, if he actually gets some real help outside of Kyrie on that roster, I mean, good Lord. I know this team's waiting for Maxi Kleber to get off injury as well. And once he comes back, I know they'll make them a little more formidable on the defensive end. But like at the root of it all, like if Kyrie does leave this summer, and I know there's reports, and I was even listening to the Colin Cowherd podcast, and it sounds like there's a possibility of Anthony Davis to Dallas. And I'm sure that there could be some framework of a sign and trade there. But even then, aren't you pretty much just back to Kristaps Porzingis kind of before the ACL injury? An insanely intriguing guy, like which, yes, the pick and roll with Luka and AD would be downright dominant. On paper, it would be really good. It would sew up a lot of their defensive issues. But again, when can you count on Anthony Davis to be healthy? When can you count on him to be at his best? When can you count on him to be fully engaged on a day-to-day basis? Because if you look at his track record, you just can't. So I don't really love the options for the Dallas Mavericks moving forward beyond this year. But you know what? Go out there. Go do your best. Go show like what this can be on the offensive end. Maybe see if this can work. Maybe see if Kyrie Irving falls in love with the basketball fit. Maybe see if he likes no state income tax. And maybe see if he goes down and talks to Joe Rogan and does some crazy over there. Because who knows? Maybe Texas is perfect for Kyrie Irving. But in all seriousness, I think the Dallas Mavericks have been one of the more dysfunctional front offices and franchises over the last decade plus. And I think that's kind of something you could back up with how they've performed on the basketball court, but also with the litigation and lawsuits that they're going through and a lot of the allegations that they face and the investigations that they've gone through for the league. It's like, yeah, I just don't really believe in what they have right now. I mean, yeah, like I'm not going to bet on the defensive ability of Christian Wood in a playoff series. I'm just not. And as good as Maxi Kleber can be on the defensive end, I'm not taking him to be able to stop a guy like Nikola Jokic, because we both know once the Denver Nuggets faces this team in the playoffs, they're going to do whatever the heck they want. It's not going to be even close. So far, it's been really interesting to watch. I've been fascinated. Speaking of the Lakers, this new roster looks a lot better, but the problem is Anthony Davis just isn't engaged. He seems to be, whatever reason, there's that mental disconnect. He might not just be trusting that foot quite yet, but all intel says that he should be okay. And listen, man, you're available. You're on the court. LeBron James needs you at some point. And I think it's pretty apparent, like, from the way that, I feel like Anthony Davis and LeBron, especially the first year LeBron was in LA, they were attached to the hip. They were borderline inseparable. LeBron talked about how Anthony Davis was the future of the Lakers, how someday when he was getting to this age, how Anthony Davis was going to take the forefront. He was going to take the back seat. Well, that hasn't happened. LeBron's had to be, the number one guy in order for this team to have a chance, which we talked about when the Lakers made this trade was not the thing that can happen. in order for this dynasty, or in order for this team to turn into a dynasty, in order for this to be the next great era of Los Angeles Lakers basketball, Anthony Davis would have to become the player that we all know that he can be. And he did during the 2020 NBA bubble. But then he hasn't been that guy since, at least not consistently, at least not 82 games in a year, at least not during the playoffs 16 times. We just haven't seen it. So, therefore, I don't really love the direction of the Lakers either, but at least I know they're better right now than they were. And you know what? Maybe that sign and trade between Kyrie and Anthony Davis, maybe that would be a perfect marriage for those two teams. Maybe they deserve each other in a way. So that's what I think of what's going on in like the national scope of like the NBA. Next up, it is time to grade the Detroit Pistons NBA season. This season has been a nightmare in the sense of what it could have been. I mean, going into this year with Cade Cunningham in year 2, what that could have been, and you know, the work he was putting in and the player that we saw he was becoming towards the, you know, the stretch of the end of last year, but also the player that we saw that he was when he was relatively healthy at the beginning of this season. We knew that shin injury was lingering for the last couple of years, but the fact that this guy was able to put out some dominant stretches of performances, especially against teams like the Atlanta Hawks and the Golden State Warriors who have playoff aspirations, I mean, it just feels like overall, like, you know, the overall grade for me is an incomplete in that sense. I mean, without Cade Cunningham on the court, you don't know truly what you have as a whole. I mean, you know, Jaden Ivey looks awesome. You know that he himself can also handle the basketball and he himself can lead the offense, but we don't know how the chemistry is with him and Cade quite yet. We don't know how those developed skills and him and Ivey maybe wanting to run the offense more. We don't know how that's going to gel with Cade once he comes back into the lineup. However, if we are doing grades and if we are talking about development and if we are going to look at things, let's go player by player. Let's go, you know, let's go through the staff. Let's go, you know, through the front office. Let's go through the coaches. Let's do it all. So let's start with the players. And speaking of Jaden Ivey, the rookie, I'm going to give him a B+. I think he's come out and played with a lot of consistency. He's developed quite a bit since the beginning of the season. I still think we all can agree that he is not good enough on the defensive end, and that needs to change, and he needs to, you know, take more onus on that end. I think he has gotten better as the season's got on in that area. I think the team as a whole, you know, has made slow but sure progress. I'm interested to see, you know, if having another big like James Wiseman behind Jaden Ivey will help his defensive game at all. I mean, defense, you know, it has to start with that pride and that onus and that consistent focus to make a consistent effort for that on a night-to-night basis. And I mean, look, you can maybe make the excuse that he's running the offense, but I mean, even then, like, you can't really. I mean, next year when Cade's in the lineup, you sure as hell can't make that excuse. So I'm more excited to see the developments. I mean, let's talk about the positives. I mean, Jaden Ivey is a playmaker, is immaculate, his ability to pass, but also create opportunities through his vision, but also his athleticism, through his footwork. He is just a special playmaker. I mean, there was a play in particular, you know, the other night where he was in the corner and, you know, he caught the ball and he was going up to act like he was going to shoot the three. And, you know, the defenders came out and extended on him. But what it did was it allowed Jalen Duren to roll behind the defenders. No one was looking at him because everyone thought that he was just going to take a three. And so when he went up and he took that extra time to go up and act like he was going to take a three, and then just at the right time, dished it to Duren so he could go in and get the basket. And you know, their chemistry, you know, is a big part of that positivity as well. So, you know, with Jaden Ivey, it's a B+. He's been one of the best rookies in the league, especially over the last 8 games. He's averaging like 15, 4 and 4, shooting 45% from the field, 42% from beyond the arc. Like, he's been everything you wanted him to be in this rookie year and more. Like, that's just year 1. Imagine once this guy gets more and more comfortable. I mean, the John Morant-esque playmaking is definitely starting to show. And so if he can start to, you know, get more consistent with his jump shot, which, by the way, he has, and a lot of that has been with his, you know, shot selection and his overall basketball IQ in that sense, because it felt like a lot of the times at the beginning of the year, and a lot of rookies can do this from time to time, maybe get a little overconfident, a little overzealous. You want to shoot out of a bad night. You want to get yourself into a rhythm. You want to, like, if you see an opening, you want to take it. But at the same time, you got to ask yourself, all right, I'm open, but is this the best shot? Is this the best look for the team? And I think that's just a process that every player has to figure out. And I think Jaden Ivey, like a lot of players, has gone through that process. And I think he's done so with a lot of grace and has done so really well. A player that I'm giving an A+, and it's not even a thought, Jalen Duren. Good Lord. How multiple teams passed on that guy, beyond me. Because Jalen Duren has the potential to not only be one of the best bigs in the NBA, but one of the best players in the NBA one day. The fact that this guy is coming in 6'10", 250 pounds, has footwork that's been compared to Moses Malone, by NBA broadcasters. He's a guy who, is the fourth teenager ever to have a 30-point, 15-rebound game, joining the likes of Moses Malone, LeBron James, Paolo Banchero, and now Jalen Duren. That's the four people. That's a pretty elite list, if you ask me. But also, it's the character, it's the work ethic, it's the demeanor. And now I'm excited to see what he's going to be able to do now that he does have another big that can compare to his size and his athleticism alongside him. Because even though we don't know a whole lot about what James Wiseman is as a player, and what we've seen so far hasn't been the greatest, I mean, let's remember, James Wiseman has not played as many career minutes as Jalen Duren. So all these definitive things that we think we know about James Wiseman, we just simply don't. So I'm looking forward to seeing, at least down the stretch of these, after the All-Star break, and, even in the first game as of this recording, tonight, when they face the Boston Celtics, I'm just excited to see what it looks like. And, quite frankly, the ceiling is the roof when it comes to Jalen Duren. How in the world the Charlotte Hornets allowed themselves to trade him out of the organization when they had him in their laps? And then the New York Knicks did the exact same thing. I mean, there's going to be multiple people that should be losing their jobs because of the fact that they passed on Jalen Duren. A player that I'm going to give a C+ is Saddiq Bey. And, a lot of that is because, well, I mean, there were times where he's had some good play. He did hit a clutch shot at one point, to like a game winner in Golden State. He has had some moments. He has had some moments where, he looked like he was taking some strides, but I think, with the reports that suggested that, that he was taking a different step than what the organization maybe wanted him to take in his development. But also, I think with the reality of how many players the Detroit Pistons are going to have to pay going forward, like, we're already getting out of our we're just getting out of our salary cap hell that we put ourselves in years ago. We don't want to put ourselves in another one. And that's just the problem. Troy Weaver's too good of a drafter. So, yeah, you are going to have to move on from somebody. And if it is going to be somebody, I guess it's going to be Saddiq. Now, I would have been way more terrified if the Golden State Warriors decided to hang on to Saddiq Bey and make him a regular part of the rotation. Because if they were like, oh, yeah, we want Saddiq and we want to make him a consistent part of our rotation, I would have been kicking myself. And I would have been so angry, because it's like, man, that would just be the perfect type of player if they believed in him, if they wanted him to plug and fit in right there, especially if he committed to the catch and shoot part of his game and to being a better defensive player on a night-to-night basis. However, in Atlanta, I'm not quite sure how he's going to develop there. I'm not quite sure what his standards are going to be and what they're going to ask of him there. So I'm interested to see what's going to happen in his career. I'm still a Saddiq Bey fan, 100%. I don't think any of that is like, bashing him as a player, as a person. I think that's just talking about the reasonings of the trade. Cade Cunningham, incomplete. We already talked about the reasons why. Isaiah Stewart, he gets an A for me. I mean, Isaiah Stewart, even though he's been struggling to shoot from beyond the arc of late, he's just developed his game in so many areas. I mean, his switchability on the defensive end, his leadership, his vocal, his vocal ability, the fact that everyone looks at Isaiah Stewart as the unquestioned leader and the guy with Cade out of the lineup. That's everything you want to see out of the development of a second-year guy, or a third-year guy like that, I should say. And quite frankly, whether he's going to be a guy that's going to be, in a starting lineup or in a bench capacity, probably a bench capacity, it doesn't really matter. I mean, this is a guy that's, that is the heartbeat and the soul of this rebuild. And you need those types of guys, like whether they're a Draymond Green or they're a multiple-time All-Star. whether it's a guy like a Rasheed Wallace, who's like a former All-Star, maybe makes a couple All-Star games when he joins your team, or even if it's a guy like Bobby Portis for the Milwaukee Bucks. Obviously Giannis is the guy there, but Bobby Portis represents a lot of what that team's about, what that city's about. But ultimately, I'm just glad that we have Isaiah Stewart in the Detroit Pistons uniform. Two guys I'm giving A's as well, Alec Burks and Bojan Bogdanovic. Holy, those guys are buckets. Yes, you can talk about the defensive deficiencies of Bojan. You could talk about Alec Burks and his availability on nights, and you could talk about that, sure. But those guys, their consistency, the fact that Troy Weaver talks so highly of them as leaders and how much they do for the young players as well in the background, that's just a lot of value for the organization, but also something that, you just don't find a whole lot of in the league. And the fact that the Pistons have, Bojan, locked up for at least the next couple of years, it sounds like reports suggest that, Alec Burks and the Pistons both want to move towards an extension this summer. And I think he's someone that you can get an affordable rate as well. And he's someone that, can definitely contribute to some winning basketball too. And especially if they don't have to play as elevated of roles as they've been asked to play this season, I think they're going to be fantastic. So yeah, those guys have been incredible additions. I would give those guys both A's as well. Again, they haven't been perfect on the defensive end, but I mean, it's kind of impossible to ask them to be, quite frankly. Marvin Bagley, I'm going to give him a D+, and I know it's a little unfair because of the fact that he has been injured for so much of the season, and we're giving Cade an incomplete when he's dealing with a similar thing. But when you're Marvin Bagley, this is year 3 or year 4 in your career. You just signed an extension, and this is kind of the opportunity for you to showcase how you could take that next step. And quite frankly, even when he was available, yes, there were nights where, Bagley was really productive, but he was never really able to fully get his feeding under him and actually get a consistent rhythm going. And he still definitely didn't show any, quite frankly, any improvements on the defensive end. We have been seeing him starting to dribble the ball more. We've started to see, him actually, participating in more warm-ups and workouts and practice sessions and things like that. So hopefully over the next month, we'll be able to see him back in the lineup and we can actually see him maybe get some run to go down the stretch for the rest of the season. But at the same time, with the acquisition of James Wiseman, it makes his future with the team just way more uncertain. So for me, I have no idea what to think of Marvin Bagley at this point. I know Troy Weaver believed in him when he acquired him, and I know that he generally likes to give guys time and allow them, to have that chance. So I'm sure he'll be on the team for at least a little bit next year, but beyond that, I have no idea. All right, now let's get to the part where everyone probably fast forwarded right to, and that is Dwayne Casey. If I had to give him a grade for what he's done this season, I would give Dwayne Casey a C+ or a B-. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, being without your best player in Cade Cunningham, having one of the youngest rosters in the NBA, having numerous injuries, multiple different lineups, and just a ton of different extenuating circumstances, I think he's done okay. I wouldn't say that he's done anything terrible. I wouldn't say that he's done anything to push this restoration over the top. I don't think he's done anything to accelerate our restoration. I don't think he's done anything to decelerate our restoration. I think Dwayne Casey has always been exactly what I thought he's been, which has been the steady hand who can guide a team through a rebuild and get them to where they need to be in order to start winning games. When we get to that conversation, my thoughts and opinions on Dwayne Casey completely change. I am not sure about his ability to make adjustments and coach against the best of the best, particularly in the modern NBA. As great as Dwayne Casey was in his time in Toronto, and as much as I believe and still believe that if he had Kawhi Leonard on his team that he could go win a championship, I personally believe now, with the way that the coaching landscape is changing as it's getting younger and younger, I do see Troy Weaver dipping into that in the next couple of years. But that doesn't mean that Dwayne Casey doesn't have a role. That doesn't mean that Dwayne Casey isn't fulfilling a purpose. That doesn't mean Dwayne Casey isn't doing what his job necessarily is. And granted, the thing about Dwayne Casey that, I respect and admire, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily consider, is the fact that he came to Detroit to win. He was brought in to win with the roster that was presented to him. And granted, in hindsight, we all saw that roster wasn't good enough to compete and win in the long term. And Dwayne Casey, unlike what a lot of coaches would have done in that situation, went to ownership and said, we need to start over. We need to rebuild. We need to get youth in here. And also, he was willing to stay through that and help assist and position the rebuild. A guy who didn't come to Detroit to lose games was willing to lose games, even if that admonished his personal record as a head coach, even if that went against his personal resume. He did what was best for the franchise and for the organization in the long term. And granted, he could very well be the Mark Jackson to whoever is eventually our Steve Kerr. But the point is, it's not like he's just this guy who's blind that doesn't know what he's seeing or doesn't know what he's processing on a given day-to-day basis when he's out in an NBA court. Everyone always looks to me or comments that he's the problem, or that once we have a legitimate coach, that things will start going in a different direction. Do you really think the coach is the reason why we're losing all of these games this year? Are we watching the same games? Are we looking at the same rosters that are being fielded? Are we both seeing that Killian Hayes is getting 10 to 11 shot attempts a game and he's often going 20% or 15% from the field? Like, am I the only one that sees that? And granted, you could say, why isn't the coach pulling him out? Well, because he has a directive to develop these players. Part of developing these players is giving them a long leash, letting them do those types of things. That's a directive from the front office. That's a directive from ownership. It's a movement. It's an agenda set from the top down. So I personally don't really like the fact that people just think that he's the sole problem. But again, I wouldn't claim that he's the solution either. So I'm interested to see what's going to happen with Dwayne Casey over the summer. I personally wonder if this is the transition point to when Dwayne Casey or maybe goes into a role within the front office or in the organization, and maybe Troy Weaver, at that point selects a new head coach. I mean, we saw how well Will Hardy's done in Utah, right? I mean, we've seen what great young head coaches have done to rejuvenate some of these franchises. So, I personally wonder, maybe a new voice would be warranted at this time. And it wouldn't be because of Dwayne Casey being a bad coach, but it would be for this stage of the rebuild, for where we're heading going forward. Maybe it's time to get the voice that's going to lead us to that next era of Pistons basketball. And last up, Troy Weaver. I'm going to be giving Mr. Weaver a B- because I think Troy Weaver has done a lot of really good things. I mean, from top down, his draft selections thus far have been excellent, especially this past year. You really can't mock or mark down the draft selections of Jaden Ivey or Jalen Duren. I mean, both have been excellent. And you could argue that Jalen Duren could have been drafted at number 5 overall, and we still wouldn't be upset with how the draft went for the Detroit Pistons. However, it does need to be said that he did a great job of setting this team up for future success in 2023. He did choosingly put this team in a position to not win as many games this season. And so when Alec Burks was down and Marvin Bagley was down at the beginning of the season, the Pistons couldn't handle it. And then when those guys came back and Cade Cunningham subsequently went down, the team was doomed. Like, at that point, the season was already done, and it was October, right? So I think when you're talking about what Troy Weaver can do going forward, we know how well he's done for setting up this team for talent in the future. We've seen the amount of young players that he's brought into the fold, but also some actually really good, solid veterans in Alec Burks and Bojan Bogdanovic who can really help this team win games. when we have everything right, when we have all the mixing pieces together, when we have the adequate free agents that in the wing pieces that can help us on the defensive end, when we can actually adequately match teams with size and actually switch multiple players on multiple different positions. When this team actually looks like it fits the modern NBA a little bit more. And you know, Troy has done things to address that proactively along the way. You know, he did go and get, you know, Jalen Duren and you know, over this offseason, and Jaden Ivey to make this team more athletic. He did trade for James Wiseman at the deadline in order to get this team bigger and to help on the defensive end, because this team did need help in the interior, and this team did need help on that side of the ball. But at the same time, I mean, as much as we talk about how much we love Jalen Duren, we sure are looking like we could use Jeremy Grant quite a bit right now, right? Like we're missing those solid wing pieces, and that's going to be the big test for Troy Weaver this summer, is how can you bolster the rest of the roster? What additions can you make? What is the next step in your granular plan? Because thus far, everything has worked. Everything's gone really well. And granted, if you're going to have a season where everything goes to, it may as well be the season where Victor Wembanyama's on the table. But at the same time, it's hard to keep losing games and expect everyone to be on board. And you're seeing that. You know, you're seeing a lot of the impatience. And so, as much as it's exciting to see guys in the Rising Stars Challenge every year, as exciting as it is to have, you know, a guy in the Skills Challenge 2 years in a row from your team, it'd also be nice to see our team in the playoffs and start winning games eventually. So I understand where a lot of people's impatience and frustration is. I'm also of the opinion that next season is when we need to start turning the corner and need to start seeing some of the fruits that need to be bearing. But I'm more than confident in the people that are in place that are going to get us there, especially with a healthy Cade Cunningham next season. That alone is going to make this team considerably better. And that's not even talking about the possibilities that are facing the Detroit Pistons at the NBA draft and the lottery. Because whether it's Victor Wembanyama, whether it's one of the Thompson twins, whether it's Brandon Miller from Alabama, whether it's Scoot Henderson, like, the Pistons are going to be just fine. All right. And to end this episode of Mornings with the Murph, I have to get something on my chest. The NBA dunk contest is dead. I mean, it's officially gone. We've known this for a while, but each and every year we talk about, man, the dunk contest is so bad. But we don't talk about, like, and then we're like, maybe they could do this. Maybe they could do that. What if the stars are invested? Well, it's apparent that the stars do not care anymore about the NBA dunk contest. And you want to make it apparent? Let's look at the dunk contest participants. First off, we have KJ Martin of the Houston Rockets, followed by Trey Murphy III of the New Orleans Pelicans. Then there's the dunk god himself, Jericho Sims from the New York Knicks, and NBA two-way player Mac McClung, who you might know better from his high school clips that were posted all over Overtime in 2018 or 2019. I mean, the NBA dunk contest used to be something that players used to take with pride. It used to be something where the stars used to show up on All-Star Night and wanted to prove that they were the best. It was a way to show and express creativity. It was a fun night, and quite frankly, if we're just at the point where teams or players just don't care about the NBA dunk contest anymore, then kill that. Either that or don't make NBA players do the dunk contest. Bring in actual professional dunkers. Bring in legitimate people who do dunk contests for a living, because that is a real thing. Because that is even where a lot of these players are getting their dunks from nowadays in the first place. So at this point, the NBA dunk contest this year, it's going to be the worst one we've ever seen. And that's saying something. And quite frankly, I'm going with Mac McClung, man, because the field sucks. And quite frankly, we were supposed to see Jaden Sharp in this year's dunk contest, but then he decided to focus on the rest of his team season. You know, the team that's like 3 or 4 games under 500, the team that is, in 10th in the Western Conference that, isn't going to have a chance of the playoff. Yeah, go ahead, Jaden Sharp. Focus on the rest of your season. Bloody hell, man. I personally will be watching the dunk contest begrudgingly. I will be doing it like a gun will be pointed to the back of my head, and my eyes are going to be gouged open just looking at the screen. And I'm going to do it with a lot of anger in my heart, remembering what the dunk contest was and thinking about what it could be with all of the athletes that we have in this league. I mean, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Jalen Duren, even. Like, for God's sakes, even just give me Mitchell Robinson. I don't care, man. Like, not this. The 3-point contest is where a lot more of the stars are because it's a lot easier on your body. It's something that, the 3-point shot is something that everyone's practicing nowadays. I mean, not as many guys are practicing these types of dunks, in the gym anymore, but we got to be doing better than this, NBA. I mean, this has to be a wake-up call because this is by far the worst dunk contest lineup we have ever seen. And with that is going to do it for today's Mornings with the Murph. If I'm going to leave you with anything, it's this. NBA, get your together, please. With that, thank you so much for tuning in. I will catch you guys on Friday for another edition of Mornings with the Murph.